We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome this morning. Welcome to our Zoom audience, as well as to our guest here today. This is the most recent installment of our Inspiring Teaching workshop that General Education has been running over the last few months. My name is Chip Oscarson. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education and Director of General Education here at the university. This workshop series is a part of an ongoing effort to spur a conversation about good teaching and regular improvement of our student learning, especially in our general education program. Typically, we meet in the Mazer building, but because of COVID numbers, as we were planning this, we thought it might be prudent to do this over Zoom this time, although we hope to return to the Mazer building next time. We're recording this session, and we welcome those of you who are joining us by Zoom. We'll be posting this subsequently on the General Education website as a resource that others will be able to take advantage of. We're coming to you from the conference room of the College of Physical and Mathematical Sciences. And thank you for hosting us. And one of the reasons we're doing that is that both of our guests today come from that college. Before we get to an introduction, though, I'm going to offer a word of prayer, if that's okay, and then we'll get started from there. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for the opportunity that we have to work at this university. We're thankful for our students and for the staff and administrators who work diligently to make these opportunities available to us and especially to our students. We pray that thou might inspire us as to how we can best help our students to grow and to learn and to improve what we do. We're thankful again for the opportunity and the blessings which we receive. We ask for a special blessing to be on those who are sick and recovering and grieving in different ways right now. That I might be with them and help us to know how we can help lift as well. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Thanks. All right. So our two guests today are first Richard Watt, who is a professor of chemistry and biochemistry. Richard is the honored recipient of the 2021-22 GE Professor of the Year, the GE Professorship. He teaches a wide range of courses in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, among which are Chem 101. And regularly, I understand you have sections of around 200 students, but you teach everything from Chem 101 to graduate kind of biochemistry lab classes as well. It's quite a range. Over just the last 4 years, he's taught around 1,300 students, from what I understand, in Chem 101 alone. His students regularly comment on how they feel, despite the large section sizes, that they are known. They feel supported by Richard and his TAs, and that he has a genuine interest in them, which I think is remarkable. He has the gift of being able to make the abstract accessible and relevant to his students. This is according to colleague comments who were part of the nomination for the award. But to make the abstract accessible and relevant to his students, some of whom, maybe many of whom, are in classes like Chem 101, maybe a little bit reluctantly, right? They're not doing it because of chemistry students, they're doing it for other reasons. They benefit from his kind patience, but they also know that he expects them to work hard and to take responsibility for their learning. So welcome, Richard, and congratulations on the GE Professorship.
Thank you very much, Chip.
Also joining the conversation today is Dr. Jenn Nielson. She's the Associate Dean in the College of Physical and Mathematical Sciences. Jenn, too, is a master teacher from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, teaching regularly between 500 and 1,000 students a year. These are numbers that your colleagues in other colleges, would kind of blow their mind, right? But you do it well. And one of the hallmarks of Jenn as an associate dean has been her efforts to innovate and improve teaching and to bring people into conversation with each other to do that. She's a real collaborator. She won the Professional Faculty Teaching Award here at BYU in 2015. Thanks for being here too, Jenn.
Thanks for asking.
All right, so we really do want to feature the expertise and wisdom, here represented here. And Richard, you did receive this award because of what your colleagues and students recognized in your teaching. Could you give us a brief idea of what is your approach to teaching? I mean, I don't know if you want to think of it as your philosophy, but when you come to teaching, what is it that what's the endeavor? What do you think are your priorities? And how does that inform what you then do?
Well, as I thought about this and kind of explaining this, as a chemist, when you introduce yourself as a chemist, you get three typical, Jen's already laughing, three typical responses. The first is, oh, yuck. The second is, oh, cool, you get to blow things up. And the third is, oh, I started out as pre-med and I took Chem 105 and I changed my major to business. So, the Marriott School has a really fantastic reputation. That's all due to the chemistry department driving really smart people over there. As far as teaching philosophy, as I think about that, and I know that we all have a continuing faculty status portfolio that we write a teaching philosophy. I don't have a teaching philosophy. I have a learning how to teach philosophy. I realized with time that I am always learning. I'm always learning that there are different teaching methods, there are different learning methods. And I worry that if I say I have a teaching philosophy, I limit my ability to, continue to find new ways to teach people. So just don't tell anybody on the continuing faculty status that my statement many years ago was something to pass the checkbox. But I think for me, I'm always learning that I can say things better. I can present it in a different way. And so that would be my hope, is I can continue to learn.
I think that's a great approach to teaching. It's never a kind of you're not a finished product anymore than your students are. What are the kinds of means of getting feedback then? If you want to improve, what are your sources for feedback that you have for saying, oh, okay, I recognize that this is an area that I might be able to work on and do better? I mean, one, of course, is just the interaction and the chemistry in the room, right?
Yeah.
But are there other things that you look to as important markers for you?
For me, office hours is a great feedback. When I first started, I was teaching at the University of New Mexico, and I was getting near the first test. It was the first time I was teaching Chem 101, and I had two students come in that were English majors. And one was very bold and one was very quiet. And so she was speaking for both of them. And she said, we have no idea what you're talking about. And so I asked some questions and figured out a topic, and I went to the whiteboard and taught it again. And she said, nope, that didn't work. And we all kind of laughed and
then cried.
Yeah. And then I said, well, why don't you try to explain to me what you understand? And she did, and it turned out, and I don't remember the word, but there was a word that in the general vernacular has a very broad meaning, and in chemistry had a very specific meaning. And when she realized that tight definition, she said, oh, well, why didn't you just say that in the first place? And we laughed again. And then we turned to the other woman and said, do you understand this? And she said, no. And so I had that student explain it to her. And then she looked at me and said, why didn't you say that in the first place? So it was this very funny interaction and I've had many others where in office hours, you learn little things that you can do better in the teaching. Okay, we're going to use this word and it has a very specific definition, or maybe I need a completely different example, or having students in office hours teach each other where I can listen. They'll say it in a different way than I do. And so that has been, office hours are very valuable. I have a weekly meeting with teaching assistants where that's the main topic, is what are students missing and what can we do better? And when you're in office hours, how do you teach it to help them understand? And then we'll go back in a subsequent lecture and say, we understand you're struggling. Some of you are struggling with this. Let's go over it one more time. Yeah. Another thing that I found with Zoom is when I find out there's a problem, you can click on Zoom, do a quick recording and post it and say, hey, send an email. People were confused with this in a lecture. Here's another attempt to try to cover that material. So,
oh yeah, that's a great kind of creative use of of Zoom, supplemental kind of explanations and lectures. I can imagine with large section sizes, particularly, it can be easy to get a little bit distant from the students, right? Especially if you have TAs that are doing a lot of the kind of the direct interface with the students.
right.
Do students come to office hours? Do you need to invite them to come to office hours?
Yeah.
Do they overwhelm you if you do invite them to office
No,
hours?
I try to get them to come as much as possible. And I think with teaching assistants, they're more comfortable going to them
Yeah.
first. I've found that just kind of with experimenting, if I teach an upper division class like the Chem 481, which has a lot of pre-med students, I'll wear a tie or a suit coat. In Chem 101, I never wear a tie or a suit coat. I try to be more inviting, less intimidating.
Yeah.
Try to be welcoming because I want them to come to office hours and feel comfortable, with me, more of a friend or I'm here to help you learn versus, somebody that's getting ready to go to medical school and that class is the last one they take before they take the MCAT.
Yeah.
They want to know that they're learning from an expert, so I try to look like an expert.
And I never wear a tie.
Yeah.
I am missing out.
You're missing out. That's right. Jen, what are some of the ways that you've seen around your college or your experience across the university? It's much broader than your college about effective ways for faculty to get feedback about if it's working, if what they're doing in the classroom, are there resources that people should know about that maybe they don't avail themselves of?
Well, again, I don't know how many people are on that are actually STEM, but we have a STEM Faculty Institute. It's been going for 3 years now. We take applicants from the STEM colleges, so engineering, life science, and our college, physical and mathematical. And the idea is that you're going through a workshop. We never learned pedagogy techniques. We never learned how to make our classes student-centered.
Mhm.
We typically have been the lecturers up at the front with the glazed eyes of the 250 that you can see. And so there's a lot of, we're researchers, we're scientists, and like many colleagues, even if you're not STEM, right? You do research, you know how to learn how to solve a problem that you don't know the answer to.
Mhm.
And yet we frequently want to improve our teaching, but we've never really tried to assess it in any kind of research way. So the STEM Faculty Institute helps you do that. And you attend during the summer. It's the equivalent of a week long, even if we spread it out over a couple of weeks. And you have what we call a peer teaching mentor or peer teaching partner, we like to call them. And it's someone who's been in the workshop the year before, and they become your one-on-one partner. So it's not just someone from your department oftentimes. And you work with them through the whole year after the workshop, and they come and look at you, watch you teach. You talk about what activities you're going to do. You've got an outcome you want them to have by the time they finish your course. You have an activity that's going to help them learn that, and then you tied it to an assessment. And this peer teaching partner has an eye on your course in the same way you do,
Mhm.
and have an interest in having you succeed. And at the same time, because they just went through it and they're improving their course, they have a new workshop participant who's coming in and sitting on their class and giving them feedback. I know this sounds like a lot of work, and it is.
Well, most of it's work you're doing anyway, though,
But
right?
yeah, a lot of it's work you're doing anyway, but you get a second person who's in your court, but is not maybe even voting on your rank and status in your
Yeah.
faculty meeting,
Mhm.
but still understands that you're in a large class, and sometimes they are too. And that's just been such a great experience. I'm one of the co-directors for it. I've never been the participant in it, and part of me wants to just be the participant in it one time so that I'm just studying on my own classes.
Yeah.
But where you can, somebody else is interested in improving their teaching the way you are. Somebody else is teaching a GE course. I think it would be great to have somebody non-STEM come in on a GE course, because oftentimes they've thought about things in a qualitative way that as a scientist, I'm often teaching quantitative.
Yeah.
And then I'm missing the conversation sometimes that you brought up, Richard.
Yeah.
Where you're actually talking to people about what they're thinking and not just the content.
Well, what strikes me, a similarity between the two comments too, is the way that you in office hours were using these students to teach each other. And there's real power, right, in re-articulating what you think you understand about something. And that's in some ways the model that that you're pursuing as well, just on the faculty level. If people are interested in this, they can reach out and get in touch with you.
Yes, in fact, I would love to see this idea of a STEM Faculty Institute. I would love to see this happening for all professors across campus, not just STEM.
Yeah, something
We're just the
general
ones that
education
are the
can
most
think of.
nerdy and lacking it the most. Start with us, please. But we have this new faculty seminar when you first come in, but it's everything. You've got to improve your research, you've got to improve your teaching, you're trying to bring in the spirit, and you're learning how to balance that at BYU. And it's a lot. So
Yeah.
we don't do everything, and we really have to concentrate on research. In the science field, in chemistry, for example, you're actually setting up a lab. That can take over a semester just on its own. You can't collect any data and do the research until you've got that up and running. And then the experiment doesn't work the way you want it to anyway. So oftentimes your research is where you have to spend your energy. So typically this the STEM Faculty Institute, it's actually for after you have CFS. So if you have CFS or you're within the year, then this is the time that we want the faculty to come, because you've always wanted to change your class. But I'm going to use a chemistry term. The activation barrier is too high, and you need some catalyst to bring that down so that you can get back over there and actually try something really substantial change maybe in your course. And the Institute's really great for that.
Yeah, that's a great center resource, something that we could probably learn from in general education. Maybe
Yeah, let's
think
do
how
it
we
on
can
the
scale
side.
up, right? That'd be a
Love to do
great
that.
idea.
Universities, actually, this has been an NSF project for the last 3 years, and the university has just agreed to support. The STEM colleges are helping to pay for a coordinator, but we've got the blessing of the administration. And I would love to see the faculty, maybe the faculty center and GE team up.
Collaborate on something. It sounds like a really promising idea. But let's talk a little bit about general education courses. What are some of the specific challenges you feel like you face in general education courses, in teaching general education as general education? So I guess embedded within this question is, how are general education courses unique in your mind from disciplinary courses that other disciplinary courses that you might teach? And then how is student learning different in these classes? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And we met briefly and talked about kind of the format of this, and I had never considered them being different. So I'm not the one to answer that question. I think my approach was, here is a different population of students with maybe less background. And I looked at them as going into nursing or exercise science or nutrition, because those are, first day of class, I asked what their majors are and how chemistry applies to their career. And maybe just automatically made a mental transition without thinking, oh, this is a general ed class. It was, how can I support the students prepare for their majors? So maybe I need to think a little bit more about that.
Well, I think one challenge that we haven't historically attended to with general education is thinking about how, as a general education class, it fits into a program in the same way that disciplinary courses fit within a program.
Right.
But it's a different kind of program, right? It's not it's not that, okay, the knowledge you'll be gaining here will directly be built on in a kind of sequential way with the next course and the next course. Rather, it's about kind of building a breadth and a perspective that is supposed to complement, this kind of way of approaching knowledge and understanding the world is different than what you're going to be getting over in the arts and humanities or in the social sciences, right? That they kind of fit together in a different kind of way. That's one of the I think challenges of what would that look like in a chemistry class? You're both teaching, okay, this is how this discipline creates knowledge, but these are the questions that it doesn't answer, right? It can tell us how to do something, but not why. For example, we need or don't need to do that, something like that. I don't know, Jen, do you have any thoughts on kind of the uniqueness of general education courses and how that might change either what we teach or how we teach?
I do think the non-major courses, so we have a lot of GE courses, and maybe this is different than other people's, but we have a lot of GE courses that are major courses.
Right.
But the students aren't going to be chemists. So yeah, in that sense, there's a wide range of interest and ability and maybe understanding the tools that you need. So in science, and every field needs this. If you're going to make a statement about something, you need to back it up with evidence. So sometimes in my GE course, I make sure I'm really explicit about that. This is actually what you're doing. So if I ask you a question, don't just tell me, well, it's to the far right on the periodic table. That's not an answer for what's electronegativity. One of the concepts that our students learn. You know, tell me why. What is that? How did we come to it? And how do you use it as a tool? Why should you care? And so anyway, I think having students a chance to engage with it. Our classes are more likely to have someone say, is this the right formula?
Yeah.
And that's the very question we don't want them to ask. We want them to say, what's the problem and what tools might I need? And when does this condition, when this works, break down?
Yeah. Now, Richard, from our conversations, I know you're really good at making the abstract graspable to kind of attainable by your students. How do you do that? How do you do the move that Jen's describing here, where, okay, it's not just about plugging in the formula. I want you to understand this.
Yeah, I think I try to use the why. Why do you need to use this? So, you know, if it's radioactivity, you know, you say the word radioactivity and people panic and run, right? And, you know, some of these students will be nurses and maybe work in a chemotherapy or a radiation, an area where they would give radiation treatments. And, you know, I tell them, you know, I use a lot of personal examples. So I had a growth on my eye that had to have surgically removed, but then to prevent it from coming back, I had to go in and they would take this piece of radioactive metal and hold it against my eye for 30 seconds. And I had to do that for, you know, once a week for 6 weeks. And so here is a very valuable use of radioactivity. And you need to understand that so you can protect yourself as a nurse or a doctor, or as a patient, understand that you may be exposed, you know, to radioactivity. Maybe you've got issues with your heart and they give you radioactive thallium, which deposits in your heart, and then you can image the heart. So try to tell them there's a reason for all of these things, and here's the story behind it, or the why.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why if you understand this, then you're not afraid of it, and, you know, things like that. So
Yeah. How do you use case studies in your teaching? Does that fit into this same kind of thing?
yeah, I try to do that as much as possible. Find a story or an experience that most of the class will have heard of, a disease or a condition. And then say, okay, if this is the condition, we can either understand the biochemistry or the chemistry that leads to that.
Did you do that with cystic fibrosis?
Yes. And, you know, related to, you know, when we talk about osmotic pressure or buffers or pH, explaining how osmotic pressure is involved with cystic fibrosis. And then we can also talk about potential treatments. That, you know, the mucus layer in the lungs is really thick, bacteria grow in that really well, you can't clear it. So, you know, inhalers or things that would, you know, a salt inhaler that would get salt in there that would change the osmolarity, would change, you know, the condition. And so you can, and it's interesting to have students that know somebody with cystic fibrosis.
Mm-hmm.
And man, their hands, they may have never spoken the entire semester, and all of a sudden their hands are up and they're talking about what they know. And my brother has that, and these are his treatments. And
Yeah.
it's just really amazing to see how students can connect if they've had an experience in their life.
Right. So what's the risk of using things like case studies, or, you know, kind of finding these connections, right? It might require a lot more knowledge than what they have, right? I mean, if we think about a class as, you know, kind of moving sequentially, there's kind of a focus on content. And what you're kind of suggesting here is that, well, there's a danger in doing that becomes simply abstract. There can be a way in where you take an example, a case study, but does that get ahead of the students? How do you then help them? I mean, if there's things that you haven't talked about yet that they maybe need to know and is part of that case study, is that an impediment, or is it still, I mean, the fact that you do it, you're suggesting it's still worth doing, even if they don't necessarily understand, you know, all of the background, right?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to preface everything with is this is not on the test. So, but I'm going to tell you a story, and we're going to work through this, and we're going to apply the things we've been learning over the last few days.
Mm-hmm.
And then you tell them that, and you can take certain steps where they can definitely make that connection. And then you can tell them other things and say, okay, this is beyond what we've covered. And you know, Chem 101 is often followed by Chem 285.
Mhm.
We can say, you're going to learn a lot of these principles next semester, and you should be really excited to go into Chem 285 because you get to learn this. So I think I try more than anything to advertise for Chem 285 because that's the next sequence. Yeah, but get them excited for that because it's the next step in their learning. So
well, I think it's really effective. I mean, coming at this from the humanities myself, right? That I am. It's easy for me to imagine a student who's in there for the purposes of general education, and how much more powerful it is when they understand the application of what can otherwise seem fairly abstract, right? I mean, in chemistry, so often we're dealing with
You
things
can't
that
see,
you can't see them.
the atoms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so helping them to understand that connection, it kind of brings it to life in a way, makes it relevant, in a way that's really powerful for the learning experience to have that context constantly before them.
Chip, can I add another thing that to me makes the GE different than my other courses? And I would love to hear anybody who's on here, what you end up doing, but I think it's hard to make a large class and a class with varying degrees like that inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in my field, there are fewer women than there are men. The field itself has more men in it.
Mhm.
And so I'm always looking for ways to try to make the course inclusive. And I know my colleagues are too, and I know Richard does. I think part of his storytelling, what that does is show the students your life. And then they're like, oh, it's a real human being. They see you at the grocery store and they're like, wow, he eats. But it's just such a large class. And again, there's such varying abilities. And for those who don't see themselves, in the course, STEM classes are so hard and they can assume that they don't belong. So, so I know some of the things I do is I do a lot of group work. And I think of group work as something you do more in smaller classes, especially really discussion-driven classes.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes in the group work, I'll have them do a task. And it's something to help them do the assessment later. And oftentimes I'll have them try it on their own, and then they'll get into a group. Because right then when you try it, you're aware of what you don't know. And so it helps them be reflective, and then they get the peer things going on. And then once they know somebody in the class, it's not quite so awkward to turn to someone and to see, can I be in your study group? I mean, that's a big deal, is finding study groups and having other students. I want my class to be collaborative and not competitive. And I'm sorry, but science is really competitive. It's competitive for the research grants, which you have to have or you can't do the science. It's competitive getting into medical school or graduate school. There's just all these things that make it competitive. And so thinking hard about how do I make this collaborative?
Yeah.
And how do I make every student think, feel like they can come? I know one thing I'll do is the very first day of the semester, 250 students out there, I'll look for people raising their hands to answer, and I'll pick on. I try to choose a person who maybe is, not represented in the class quite as much. And I don't say anything. I'm just trying, if I choose a woman first to make a comment, or if I ask her to open class with prayer, I hope it just signals to the students, everyone is welcome to make comments here. And there are many, and I don't have a lot of answers, and I'd love to hear from people up there if you want to put something in the chat window. What do you do to make your course inclusive, particularly if it's a course that is hard to do that with, or harder?
Any thoughts on this, Richard? How do you make your class more inclusive? How do you engage kind of a wider range of students? It's a particular challenge in these larger sections classes.
It is. If I see, well, in the Chem 101, there's a lot of nursing students. And so just by the population, there's a lot more women than men in the class. And so I think that is they feel more comfortable speaking up and communicating and sharing because they're with their peers, where in other classes, it may not be that way.
Yeah.
I try to, point out just the very first day, a lot of them are new freshmen.
Right.
Everybody's scared. Everybody's intimidated. Look around, and everybody else here wants to make a friend. So, reach out to somebody. And if you're ever coming to class and sitting and you see somebody sitting by themselves, go say hi. Introduce yourselves. Those types of things are really critical for building a class community, I try to tell them that they're always safe to ask questions. We're all learning together. And I tell them that they're going to see me make mistakes, during the semester. And of course, I do that on purpose just to make them feel better.
Of course.
But I'm going to make mistakes. They're going to ask questions that, maybe it's something that they missed, but they should have picked up. Maybe it's not. And I don't want anybody to ever feel afraid to, have a voice. And so that's, I try to do that, but there's.
Well, one of the things that's been really impressed on me, in part because of COVID and the impacts of COVID on students, is how much these other things that we think of as being kind of ancillary to the learning experience actually are really central, insofar that when you're nervous and you're anxious, or these other kind of pressures that are working on you, it makes learning harder, right? I mean, it doesn't, take much to kind of realize that, but the lower, the more, we can do to kind of lower that, it makes a big difference for students, and especially those students who are already vulnerable for other kinds of reasons, for, not the typical student reasons, but, that they're bringing with them other, kinds of challenges to the classroom. It can make a real difference in kind of creating that atmosphere that you're talking about.
Well, that's one of the reasons I think I brought it up, is that if you make it to 481, a higher chemistry class, then you are okay with the competitive spirit, or you've made it through that. You've made maybe some friends. You can do this. But what I worry about is the lower division GE courses, where a student is trying it out. They've always thought about maybe going into medicine, and now they're taking their first class, and I just hate to have it be one of our classes that makes them decide, no, this is probably too hard for me. Like, no, you can do this. Like, if you're not interested, that's one thing. But if there's some way we can support students early on, so they know I belong, if this is what I want to do, if there's a way to do it. And
well, this idea of them being able to envision themselves there, right? That I think that this is an important part of being, being a role model, being a mentor, and helping students to kind of catch that vision that it's usually within their choice, if they want to do it. How do you keep your teaching? You've been teaching at university for a while. How do you keep how do you keep your teaching exciting and fresh? And especially where you're dealing with some topics like Chem 101. These are the basics of chemistry. They're, if you're here at BYU or at another university, it's a lot of that subject matter is going to be pretty standard, right? That these are the essentials you do. So how do you as a teacher keep it to not be kind of feel really stale and canned?
Yeah, so the case studies help a lot. So that would be the first thing that I've done. I've learned to kind of play games with some of the topics. So, chemical nomenclature is always an area where the students are just like, look, you just got to memorize it, get through it,
Yeah.
So I'll tell them, hey, chemical nomenclature, I have to review this every semester before I teach it, so they know that it's just hard.
Yeah.
And then like balancing equations, I always start the lecture with balancing equations by asking who likes to do puzzles and how many of you do Sudoku books and all of those numbers. And then I tell them that my goal to become a millionaire is I'm going to sell a Sudoku book of chemical equations that you can balance. And then they all laugh, it's silly, but I try to, when there's a hard topic, turn it into a game or a puzzle or something fun. The other thing that I lucked into this 4 years ago, our chairman over teaching came to me and he said, there's a student that's a graduate student that's thinking about going into a teaching career, and she would like to team teach with you. And my first thought was, oh man, that's going to be a lot of work. And I was hesitant. But I knew the student from a previous class. I was like, yeah, I'll do it for her. The best experience of my life teaching, because we met every week. We went over what the lectures were going to be. She gave me all kinds of new perspectives of how I'd say, how would you approach these topics? And she would do that. And just I loved it. It was the best teaching. And so the next year, the chairman comes, hey, we've got another student. I'm in. The next year, I'm in. Last year, I had 2 sections and I had 2 student teachers. And that improved my teaching because I knew that I needed to make sure everything was really set with them. And then we discussed all of the topics, and if they had new ways of presenting things, we did that. And every year at some point, I'll sit down with them and I'll say, okay, we've been using my outlines on slides and stuff. I want you now to take the lead, and we're going to teach it the way you would set this up. And again, it's more work because they might completely tear apart of, I mean, I'm not really bound to the lecture slides. I use them as a guide, and I use those. I use those to get started, and then a lot of times I go to the board. But they would change everything, and I was okay with that because, and we would teach, half of the class each, and then switch halfway through. We do a demonstration every time. But the other thing that was completely unexpected is I would get to sit off to the side and watch the students' faces. When you're teaching, you're worried about what the next slide is, what you're writing on the board. And I'm not getting that connection with watching their faces and watching how they responded. So when I'm sitting there, I can see the student teaching, but I can also see the students' reactions. And I can say, okay, that, I can see the students are struggling with that. I'd never noticed that was a topic that was hard. And so I think that really has changed, how I do tests. We go through all of the tests together and come up with new questions. We go through all of the lectures. We talk in office hours about how to do topics, so that was great.
Yeah, anything that can help us be a little bit more reflective, right, on what we do and why we're doing it. That's good. Well, I have a few more questions here, but I invite those who are joined by Zoom to, if you have any questions that you'd like us to bring up here in the last few minutes, put it in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to those. Let me ask a question while people are thinking of their own for you. What does it mean for you as a chemistry teacher to make your students' experience in your classroom spiritually strengthening?
That is fascinating to me because I have had so many in the moment inspirations that pop into my mind. And I just stop right there in class and share them. I'm astounded at how many connections in the classroom on the moment I make. I did, when I teach the very first lecture, I tell them how cool chemistry is. And I always read them from Doctrine and Covenants 93. So we all believe in the resurrection. And here it is. We're going to learn about the elements of the periodic table. And so in Doctrine and Covenants 93:33, it says, for man is spirit, the elements, and I put in parentheses, of the periodic table are eternal. And spirit and element inseparably connected receives a fullness of joy. So that's the resurrection. We know that we'll be put into a glorified body. When separated, man cannot find a fullness of joy. And then it goes on and it says, the elements are the tabernacle of God, yea, and man is the element of God, even temples. And I tell them that we get to study those elements that are going to be part of us in the resurrection. And I think that sets the stage for anytime I see a connection. I study iron in my research. And the iron rod, read it to iron, you're talking about stability of the elements. It's the most stable element, right? And so God chose the most stable element to show to Lehi and Nephi because you got to hold on to that to be stable in the gospel. And so there's just all kinds of
Richard, I'm going to challenge you on that. It's carbon as an organic chemist.
The carbon fiber rod.
I'm just saying. What are we making our bike ride? I'm going to challenge you on that.
Okay, well,
that's great though. It's great to those kind of insights that again make those those scriptures, those stories in the scriptures that we're familiar with come to life.
So that connection has just been really rewarding. So
Jen, how about you? What is it that you see going on that how do we live up to our mission of what one of the most important parts of our mission probably, for these courses to be spiritually strengthening, even when the subject matter itself can certainly and is certainly taught in lots of other contexts completely outside of, that kind of consideration.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually just have to point back to Richard here for a minute, because this is what I hear from students when they talk about having had you as an instructor, as a professor, is that they are always remember the narratives that you told them, the stories that you told them that were linked to the gospel. So you do that naturally, and I think, it doesn't work if it's not natural. I mean, if it's if it's stilted and you're like, break,
Calculated, or
time for a spiritual moment. So I think you tell stories really well there, and they're authentic and they're tied to the chemistry still, but they're very helpful that way. I don't think I tell as many stories. I think the way that it comes in for me more often is in one-on-one conversations or small groups conversations. I'm deliberate with my TAs, for example. I'm deliberate to have conversations with them. I see them the most.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like I remember when I was on my mission, you could teach other families and things, but if you lost your companion soul, that's the way I will say it. There's this person right next to you that you're with the most.
Yeah.
And how are they doing, and how am I helping, and how are they helping me spiritually grow? So I think about the students that I have the biggest impact. I work closely with the Women in STEM Advisory Board, and it's women students from each of the departments. So this is in GE specifically, but having conversations where you're talking about how you grow yourself intellectually and spiritually at the same time, because that's hard when you're a student. I think you can bring it up in GE in that same way. Like they think their lives are so busy. You're like, you have no idea. But just even there, even bringing up small things, even if it's not a full narrative about how, I'm sorry, I can't run the review on Wednesday. I'm working with the young women that night. Or just letting them peek into your life on the way that you're balancing the gospel and your own spiritual, I think could go a long way. And I have to admit, I don't do it with the whole class. Oftentimes I do it with students one-on-one more, maybe. I'll have a lot of women come into my office hours and they'll say, we'll talk about chemistry, and then they'll say, hey, how did you decide to do a career? What does that look like? But having a conversation about family and career will oftentimes include also how to live the gospel. And how to stay
that kind of integrated being,
yeah.
right?
So I'm not good on a large class scale.
That reminds me of something that really stood out to me when President Worthen was inaugurated as university president. I remember his first talk, and it's it was pointed out to me by a department chair as a model for how we can approach our classes. That he started his first talk by saying, "This is who I am. I'm I'm a lawyer. I'm a disciple of Christ. I have a testimony, and kind of like so where I'm coming from, kind of thing." And I thought about how powerful that can be for students to hear. I mean, they guess it, I think, a lot, but maybe sometimes we can be more explicit in kind of sharing your conviction, because they're making that connection that, oh, here's a chemist who's kind of on the cutting edge of his or her field of research, and they're also a devoted disciple of Christ. These things are compatible, which thing I'm not getting from other places maybe that are saying that they're not, and that alone can be really powerful motivator in bringing in and in kind of infusing in our classes something that can strengthen them.
I know I have a lot of colleagues who are really good at this too, having a one-on-one conversation. I think Richard does it really well in the big class. I think that's another skill I know I'd love to develop. So, and I don't know for other fields, I'm just assuming across campus people are having conversations. For me, it was deciding to be deliberate about it, and that's kind of a newer thing. I thought it was just happening.
Yeah,
it's just happening. People know that I believe. But I'm trying to bring it up and then ask them, how do you think about this?
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left here. What's the most rewarding student comment you've ever received?
Oh, I think it was, I was told that my class should be cross-listed as a religion class.
Yeah,
that's great.
That was That was my favorite one.
That's okay. I agree that would, suggest a lot to how it's, a unique kind of education, right? That's not just about preparing for, kind of professional field or, kind of a academic field, but something with greater implications. So what is the advice that you received once as as a young faculty member, or advice that you would want to give to a young faculty? What would be the most valuable thing that you think you could give to a younger faculty member who's just starting out, wants to improve their teaching? What would it be?
I think there's two things that really have helped me. One is have fun with the class. Make the material fun for yourself. If you're burdened by trying to cover everything in the textbook and do a checklist, you lose the joy of just being in there and teaching. And then the other one is, be yourself. Everybody has their own set of personal skills that brought them to this point. And, I may have a certain set that's going to connect with a group of students. And, anytime we read our student reviews, there's, some that think you're the best ever, some that think they're the worst ever. And then the ones in the middle, you can get valuable insight from. So, I feel bad that there are still people that think that I'm the worst ever. But, when they get to Jen's class the next semester, then she can make up for that deficiency. But you have to be yourself. You have to use your talents and skills and your personality. And if you do that, you'll be successful.
Yeah, I think that's great advice.
I'll share some of my student comments with you, and then you.
Well, thanks to both of you for the time you've given in being here and having this conversation. Thank you, Richard. Congratulations once again on winning this distinction. It's well earned. You have a lot of great insight and wisdom, about teaching generally and teaching GE specifically. So we appreciate, on behalf of the tens of thousands of students, which is not an exaggeration to say, right, that have had the benefit of going through your class. Thank you for what you bring to the table every day.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining and listening.
Yep. Thank you.